Hey everybody, welcome back to BobkeTV and my preview of the 2018 Giro d'Italia, the Tour of Italy, starting May 4th. Giro, guys, time is nigh for the Grand Tour Season to commence and beginning as it has done since they moved the Vuelta to the fall in the 90s. First Grand Tour of the year is the Giro. And this year's Giro is a very interesting route. It's incredibly arduous. I'm just going to say that right off the top. Not necessarily because of the mountains involved, not necessarily because of the riders and the teams involved, but because of the bane of professional cycling, the transfers. It's going to be bouncing all over the world, unlike any other Grand Tour has ever done. And we'll get to that in a second. A bunch of tough climbing stages. The last week is a death march, absolutely grim. 2 time trials, stage 1, just about 10 Ks, and way deep, stage 16, 34.2 Ks, about 22 miles, and stage 16 time trial. And I'll get to the last week in a minute, but incredibly arduous, difficult, grueling. It is a real slog all the way to the end. It starts in Israel. There's been some controversy about that. I'd be remiss not to mention it. I don't think anything's going to happen. Bike racers are maybe the slipperiest of athletes in the world. And I mean that in the best possible way. Bike racers have a way of extricating themselves from danger on a regular basis. So I think it's going to go off without a hitch. One thing I am a little bit worried about is the peloton's reaction to roads they've never raced on before. And to be honest, until we get there, it's going to be very difficult to predict what the roads are going to exactly be like. They might be gorgeous 4-lane boulevards with no traffic circles. But I have a feeling that any of the smaller roads are going to be very different from what the peloton is used to seeing in Central Europe. So the peloton has an incredible ability to adjust. However, you need more than 1 time trial and 2 road stages to do that. So it's going to be a very intriguing start to the Giro in Israel. Let's just leave it at that. And a pivotal time trial. A lot of the climbers really struggle against the clock, and that gives the more versatile GC men, to mention just 2, Tom Dumoulin and Chris Froome, a big advantage. They can get huge chunks of times, it seems like, on the pure climbers these days. So 2 time trials, they're going to be decisive, as they always are, and some very tough mountain stages, especially at the end, the last week of the race. Even early, there's a tough mountaintop, stage number 6 to Monte Etna on the island of Sicily. And that will come after 2 stages before that in Sicily, so the 3rd stage in Sicily. And after the first 3 stages in Israel, a long transfer and a very long stage number 3, before the long transfer. So the Giro is calling it rest day number 1 out of 3 rest days, but that is not a rest day for anybody, especially when you're trying to do a Grand Tour and you have to do a long transcontinental flight, and there's going to be some tire legs in Sicily. 3 stages in Sicily, Mount Etna, tough climb, and then another long transfer from Sicily to the mainland, And that's not going to be easy either. Stage 9 is a tough mountaintop finish to Gran Sasso d'Italia. Both of those climbs raced in my Giro career in the past, and both of them, if I recollect correctly, are absolutely brutal. Not probably a lot of time to be won or lost on Etna or Gran Sasso d'Italia, but there will be some time gaps most certainly open up on those two climbs. But things get diabolical, starting with stage number 14 up the Zone Colon, one of the toughest climbs in all of professional cycling. Stage 14, you want to be closing in on a comfortable lead if you're Chris Froome and or Tom Dumoulin. And if you are on the back foot, you're going to be attacking on the Zone Colon to get time back from whoever is leading the Giro at that time. My feeling is it will be Chris Froome, as long as he's still in the race. We're going to get to that in a minute, but when we get to the favorites. But the last week, starting with stage 14, stage 18 to Prato Nevoso, very tough. Stage 19 is absolutely insane. Colle delle Finestre, that's the Cima Coppi, the highest point of the Giro this year. Dirt climb for like 9 kilometers. And then that finishes at the border with Italy, with the border of France on a very long, tough climb I've been over many times, Bardonecchia. That's stage 19. You're into the last weekend of the race, and you're still killing yourself. Cervinia is the second to last stage before another long transfer to Rome for the last day of the race. And that up to Cervinia, climbed that before, and has plenty, I think, 4 categorized climbs beforehand, including 2 grisly ascensions before the final climb. The mountain stages are brutal. Like I mentioned before, stage 16 is a time trial. So. And what I think, because it is so arduous the last week, it's very tough to attack the leader and expect to get a whole lot of time. And it definitely favors Chris Froome as long as he's still in the race. And it plays in to his strength, whereby he gets a lead, pads it in the time trials, and then all he has to do is ride defensively, respond to the attacks. He knows exactly how much time he can lose and keep his lead. And we've seen Chris Froome do that on a number of occasions to win. What is it now? 5 Grand Tours with 1 pending. And as we get into the favorites, it's pending because the salbutamol case is still hanging over the sport. It could be decided during the Giro, which would be a complete disaster for the race, especially if he's leading and he gets kicked out. And I believe if that happens, it will be bad for the Giro temporarily, but it will be good for the sport in the long run. And the sport and the athletes involved will understand that they're responsible for what goes into their body, and if it's too much of salbutamol or any amount of EPO, or it is some sort of supplement, which I'm having more and more difficulty believing that is the case, tainted supplements. Whatever it is, the athlete is ultimately responsible. And if you violate any of those rules and regulations, you are subject to a penalty, whatever that may be. So my feeling is the case will not the results will not be provided to us until after the Giro, no matter what the decision is. Even if the decision to ban Froome, to disqualify Froome from the Vuelta, whatever the penalty is going to be, even if they've decided what it's going to be, I don't think it will be announced until after the Giro, which is also problematic, but not quite as controversial as in the middle of the Giro, especially if Chris is leading. And if you're the race promoter, I mean, it is very tough to put on a Grand Tour. And the Giro has struggled financially in recent years to attract enough sponsorships to make the Giro profitable for the owners, RCS. So a lot at stake at the Giro this year. Chris Froome, for my money, is the preemptive favorite. The course favors Froome's talents with the 2 time trials and the very difficult last week for the reasons I mentioned before. And his rivals, he's so much better than anybody in this race except one guy, and that is Tom Dumoulin. More on him in a second. But Chris has won 5 Grand Tours. He might lose the Vuelta eventually. He might not get a chance to start the Tour, depending on what happens to his case a little bit later in the summer. He's going to be very incentivized to get the maximum out of this Giro. And nobody in this field can beat him unless there's some sort of catastrophe accident-wise or a disastrous announcement from the governing bodies that he's going to be disqualified from racing for however much time, starting immediately during the Giro. His chief rival should be Tom Dumoulin. It was a little bit worrying. Tom Dumoulin did not have a spectacular spring until Liège-Bastogne-Liège. He had a stomping ride in a tough classic, the last big classic of the spring. And so Tom Dumoulin should be on good form. Last year, a very topsy-turvy, difficult win against Nairo Quintana. It was definitely the time trials that Tom Dumoulin got the maximum amount of time possible and rode defensively in the mountains. So the problem for Tom Froome, Tom Dumoulin, Tom Froome. The problem for Tom Dom is that Chris can match him in the mountains and be very close. It match or drop in the mountains and be very close in the time trials. So he's going to need a huge advantage after stage 16, and I just don't see that happening. I see him being behind Chris Froome after the first long time trial. Some of the other guys that I think will be on the podium, and I'm going to give you my podium in a minute. Fabio Aru, winner of the Vuelta previously, and second in the Giro, I believe. Simon Yates, Mitchelton rider. Very solid performer in the Grand Tours. Thibaut Pinot, been on the podium in the Tour de France in the past, if I'm not mistaken. And Miguel Angel Lopez from Astana. Should be the riders most likely to be on the podium. I'm going to give 2 scenarios here. Froome is still in the race at the end of the Giro podium, and if he's not at the end of the podium. If Chris Froome is not in the race, Miguel Angel Lopez will win the Giro. You heard it here first. And Lopez is going to be on the podium no matter what happens to Chris Froome. I think that either way, Tom Dumoulin is either second if Miguel Angel Lopez is the winner and Froome has been disqualified, or third. So my podium with Froome in the race, Froome, Lopez, Dumoulin, and without Lopez, Dumoulin, and Simon Yates. That's my podium. Thibaut Pinot will probably have a pretty good Giro. Fabio Aru, I think he might struggle a little bit, not riding great this year. His team, UAE, is still trying to find the magic that's required to contend. Dan Martin on that team will not be racing the Giro, by the way. It's plagued by bad luck, and UAE is still in, let's say, a developmental phase. Some other riders to pay attention to see what their progress is. Michael Woods going to be very interesting. He had a great Liège-Bastogne-Liège a couple weeks ago and was 7th in the Giro last year. He's on the EF, Education First team. It'll also be very interesting to see how Rowan Dennis does. His goal as a professional cyclist, he said, is to be a contender for the Grand Tours, and he's followed a very gradual development into that. He started 7. I believe he's only finished 2. He's led the Tour de France. He's had some great successes in the time trials. And it'll be interesting to see how Rowan Dennis does in this Giro. It's a course that doesn't seem to favor him because of how many difficult mountaintop finishes there are. But if that is his goal, I think he has the talent to be a contender in the Grand Tours. So a steady progression in the Giro is something that I'll be very curious to watch and see how Rowan Dennis gets through the Tour. George Bennett, also winner of last year's Tour of California, was up there in the Tour last summer, and he just seemed to, his exuberance seemed to get the better of him. Just it was horrible to watch him struggling so desperately in the last few days of last year's Tour. Hopefully he can put the whole 3 weeks together and still be competitive in the finale. Also, Davon Chavez, twice on the podium of Grand Tours. I think he was second in the Giro and third in the Tour a couple years ago, but has seemed to plateau a little bit and has not seemed to make a lot of forward progress since 2016 when he had such a spectacular year. Also, I think he won Giro di Lombardia, one-day monument at the end of that year. So watching Chavez, also, he might be called into action to help Simon Yates if Simon Yates is racing as well as I think he can. So it'll be interesting, all of those stories. Miguel Angel Lopez, also from Astana, he's starting to become a rider that has a bad day when the pressure is on. And if I was advising Miguel Angel Lopez, I would say, don't worry about stages. Go all in for the GC, and I think that he's going to be very competitive. But we'll see. From the U.S., 4 guys from the United States. Chad Haga, who'll be helping Tom Dumoulin to try to win, as Chad did last year, very successfully, I might add, with very little fanfare. Chad was fantastic in last year's Giro. So good luck to the Sunweb team, Joe Dombrowski and Nate Brown from Education First. Presumably, they will be helping Michael Woods try to get on the podium. Not impossible. Top 5, most certainly within his grasp. So, we're down to 8 riders, so 7 teammates of a GC guy. And so I think that every team will be using every rider the entire 3 weeks to defend one GC leader. Mitchelton Scott is on paper saying they have 2 leaders, but when it comes down to it, I think Chavez will be working for Yates. Everybody else, as far as I can tell, 1 leader, and then 7 teammates to help. Ben King, also first Giro for Ben King. Ben's remarkably good in May. So best of luck to Ben King. And if he finds the right breakaway, big chance to win a stage in the Giro. Louis Meintjes is going for the GC, but as soon as he falls out of contention, which could be at any point, maybe he's still there in the last few days, but if it's early, then Ben King should have plenty of opportunities to go for stages. I talked to Ben. He's fired up. He can't wait to do the Giro, and it'll be great to watch his progress also. One American man has won the Giro in the past, but 2 women have won the women's Giro. Mara Abbott, 2 times winner of the Giro, and Megan Garnier just a couple years ago. Don't believe any of the Americans on the roster are going to win the Giro d'Italia in 2018, but you never know. Nate Brown is a very strong cyclist and continues to be impressive in the Grand Tours. It's hard to it's hard to say that none of those guys will ever win a Grand Tour, but at a certain point, and I'd like to share this with everybody. First of all, the 3-week Grand Tours are the pinnacle of professional bike racing. Classics are nice. Worlds are great. The week-long stage races are fantastic. But the Grand Tours, those bring out the characteristics of the athlete better than any other cycling event, and it's what defines our sport. That is the absolute top of the mountain in professional cycling. And so this is the tricky part for professional cyclists, because everybody dreams of wearing the pink jersey or the yellow jersey or the gold jersey, the red jersey now at the Vuelta. It's changed colors many times, but being pragmatic about your talents is critical to being a successful professional. Steve Cummings is a great example. He's not going to win any Grand Tours, but he has won so many big races by understanding his attributes and picking the day and peaking physically and emotionally for that and delivering. And that is the critical equation that you have to solve as a professional cyclist. There's only one critical equation to solve if you're not racing, if you're riding, and that's just ride. But racing, racing, identify your strengths, fit those into the races you're doing, and deliver. And that is how to be a successful cyclist. And it's going to, and the Grand Tours bring that out in the best of the best in cycling. So I love the Giro. Did it 3 times. The food's so good. It wasn't a problem to finish all 3. I will say this: my first race as a professional cyclist was the Giro d'Italia. I don't recommend that. I would never recommend anybody try that. You want to have a much more gradual progression before you dive headfirst into the deep end of the ocean. Can't wait to watch it. I'm going to do periodic updates. I promise that. I will be working at the Tour of California, so there will be a chunk of time in the middle of the Giro where it's going to be impractical to, at least it'd be difficult to promise that I'll be doing them. But anyways, hope everybody out there enjoys the Giro. I'm not sure who's covering it. Not sure. I think BN has the rights to the Italian races, but I'll be honest, I don't know if they broadcast it. Please let everybody know if you know how to see it, how to watch the Giro in the United States. Go to the comments section. I guess Fubu TV you can subscribe to, and you can. If you subscribe, I guess you're not pirating, but I'm not. I'm not sure about their business model. But please go to the comment section and mention, if you would, where it can be viewed daily in the United States. Tour of California, it can be on NBC every day. No problem. Super easy to find. Anyways, everybody, thanks for watching, and good luck to everybody in the Giro d'Italia. Safe travels, and I don't know, salbutamol. Let's hope that that doesn't ruin people's enthusiasm for an incredibly gorgeous, spectacular bike race. Thanks a lot, everybody.